Now, if you're buying a rental property that's already been a rental property from somebody else, if the person will provide you with documentation about how much they've received in rents, that's very helpful. If they're doing it through something like Airbnb or VRBO, it's very easy for them to generate that. And it's something that's probably pretty accurate, especially if it's a printout. They're not making it up. If it's something they're just giving to you on Excel, they've generated it themselves, then you maybe want to be a little skeptical. And a great way to confirm this would be to ask them for a copy of their tax return that actually shows this on there, because that way you'd be sure that what they're putting on their taxes is most likely fairly accurate.
Are you ready for a successful retirement? We're addressing the topics facing today's retirees. Welcome to Retire with Ryan. Now here's your host, Ryan Morrissey.
Welcome back. This week we're going to talk about buying a second home. So maybe you found yourself on vacation and you've wondered what it would be like to buy a house in that area. Maybe you've even thought you'd like to retire in this area. So before you buy that second home, there's definitely some things that you want to be aware of, some mistakes to avoid. So we're going to talk about those today. So obviously the first step in buying a second house, number one, would be to know, can you afford it? And that depends upon a couple things. Whether or not this is going to be your second house exclusively, or maybe it will be a rental property. So depending on those two things, it's really going to dictate how you will approach that. So we'll start first with whether this is going to be just your second house and you're not going to rent it out. Obviously, you'd want to make sure that you could afford the house. And how would you figure that out? Well, you'd want to know what some of the expenses of the house would be. For example, how much are the taxes on the house? What would the insurance costs be on the house? Is it a condo or in part of an association, as a lot of vacation areas tend to be? So how much would that be a month? And would there be any special insurance? Are you in a flood zone, or are you in an area that maybe gets hit more with hurricanes? You'd want to know what additional insurance there might be for that. And then you'd have to decide whether or not you had the available funds to pay for this house with cash, or whether you're going to get a mortgage. Now, probably for most of you, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to pay cash for the house, because even though it is great to be debt-free, especially on your primary residence, it might not make as much sense on your second house, because you'd have to be taking money out of your investment portfolio that you'd be living off of and putting it into the second house, where it wouldn't actually be generating any income for you. Especially being that interest rates are so low, you could most likely get a long-term mortgage anywhere from 15 years or longer, and your interest rate would probably be less than what you could hopefully make on your investments over the long term. So once you had all those numbers, that's the starting point. The next, you'd want to get some estimates as far as what utilities you'd be paying, whether or not you're going to keep your utilities on when you're not there, or you're going to totally shut them off. But you'd want to know what they would be for the part of the year that you're going to be living there. And you'd also want to know what additional things are you going to need to buy for this house. Most houses that you're going to buy, unless you're negotiating it in advance, are going to come unfurnished. So you're going to need to buy furniture, you're going to need to buy plates, silverware, beddings, linens. You could walk around your current house and you could start making a checklist of all these things that you're going to need to buy and get some handle on what that's going to cost. And for the most part, you'd probably have to be paying for this with cash or out of your investment accounts, because it is hard to build this into the purchase price of a house. You usually can't borrow that. So once you had that list, then you can start to assess and see, can you afford to maintain two houses? So for a lot of people, this is a difficult proposition because it is expensive to maintain two households. It's expensive in a lot of cases just to maintain one household. A lot of people going into retirement are thinking about downsizing for that very reason. But you also, I mentioned earlier, you could use this as a rental property as well, and you could rent it out for some of the time that you're not there. So the things to know about that is you want to be very careful anytime you're generating estimates as far as how much rent you could receive for the property. Anytime you talk to maybe an agent selling the property or a salesperson, potentially if you're buying a brand new property, you sometimes can be given rather rosy figures and told that, oh, you can rent it out for X amount, or, you're going to do really well renting this out, when in fact, that might be very difficult. Case in point with COVID right now. Obviously, if you own any type of vacation property, there's a possibility that you're struggling renting it out because of the fact that people aren't traveling as much. But that aside, you want to err more on the more conservative side so that you would know, even if maybe you only rented it out for half as much as you thought you were able to, how would that impact things? Now, if you're buying a rental property that's already been a rental property from somebody else, if the person will provide you with documentation about how much they've received in rents, that's very helpful. If they're doing it through something like Airbnb or VRBO, it's very easy for them to generate that. And it's something that's probably pretty accurate, especially if it's a printout. They're not making it up. If it's something they're just giving to you on Excel, they've generated it themselves, then you maybe want to be a little skeptical. And a great way to confirm this would be to ask them for a copy of their tax return that actually shows this on there, because that way you'd be sure that what they're putting on their taxes is most likely fairly accurate. And if you're going to be renting this property out, you definitely want to look at it as an investment, because after all, you're taking money and you're putting it into it so that you can live at it, but you have to look at it as far as what type of return it's generating. A way you can easily figure that out at any property that you're looking at is you can calculate what's known as the cap rate or the capitalization rate. And very simply, let's just say you were looking at buying a property for $100,000. and you're able to rent it out and bring in $10,000 a year of rental income. You then would want to subtract your insurance and tax costs from that. So for simplicity, let's just say those are $2,000 a year. So that would leave you $8,000. You then would divide that net income, that $8,000 divided by the purchase price of $100,000, and that gives you 8%. So that property has an 8% cap. So that's what your return on that property is. So that's a way that you can look at a property and you can see what type of return is it generating, because you could leave that $100,000 in your investment account, and if you're able to do better than 8%, then maybe you're better off leaving it. But if you're going to do worse than 8%, then maybe you're better off buying the investment property. So anytime you're looking at real estate, you want to know what the cap rate is. And usually you want to buy something that at least has a 6 or 7% cap or higher, because in my example, I'm not assuming any costs of maintenance. And as you know, if you own real estate, things break, things wear down over time. And, like a roof or plumbing, electrical, mechanicals, these things will have to be repaired. So if you're not assuming some cost for that and you're not factoring that into that cap rate, then your return is going to be less than what you thought. Instead of 8%, maybe it's only 5 or 6%. And then maybe it becomes not as attractive of an investment. The other thing that you want to do anytime you're buying a rental property is you want to look at what repairs, while we're on the subject of repairs, what repairs or maintenance might there be that you might have to fix. So how old is the roof? How old are the windows? How old are the mechanicals, the heating and cooling? Are there cosmetic repairs that you're planning to do to the property? Do you want to renovate the kitchen, the bathrooms? Do you want to paint the walls? Do you need to put new flooring in? Also look around, especially if you're buying in any type of association, a condo, a townhouse community. How do things look in there? Do the roads look in good condition? Do the buildings look in good condition? Are there potential assessments that could be coming down the road? These are things that you want to think of, because a lot of times you just are enamored with and rightly so, maybe the nice area or the comfortable climate, and you're not thinking about the longer term expenses that you might have. So a lot of experts also recommend that before you do move and buy a house in an area that you're maybe not familiar with, or buy a property, you think about renting there for a little while. Maybe you rent there for a season, you rent there for 6 months, maybe a year, to get a feeling for what it would be like to be there. Maybe after renting, for 6 months, you decide that you'd rather just visit this place every once in a while and not make it your full-time residence, right? So make sure that you do that. But if you are familiar with the area, make sure that you are also using some type of expert to help you with your purchase. As anyone who's been around real estate, one of the first things that they tell you about anytime you buy is location, location, location. So make sure that you're buying in an area that is a good location, because when it is time for you to sell, and this could be long time down the road, or maybe it could be short term, if your plans change, you want to make sure that you're able to easily sell. And one of the biggest things is the location. For example, don't buy a house maybe on a busy road that would be hard for you to sell, or in an area that maybe has property values that are declining. Examples like that. And you also want to think about the long term. If you've decided now is the time for you to buy, and if you have children, and maybe you don't have grandchildren yet, but generally, once those grandchildren come, you're probably going to want to spend a lot of time with them. And it is great to be in a nice, maybe resort type area, warm climate, and you can get the grandchildren to visit, but they're only going to visit so often. And if you want to spend more time with them, maybe you want to be closer to them. So that's why it's really important that you think about where your children may end up and whether or not you'd want to be close to them before you do make this purchase. Because the other option with all of this is that there's nothing wrong with renting. I hear all the time that renting is bad, you're throwing your money away, you're not building equity. And that is true, you're not building equity. But what you don't have is you don't have the headaches that come with being a landlord, right? Owning a second property. You also don't have any of those expenses. You don't have to reach into your pocket and pay for a failed air conditioner or a new refrigerator or a roof or anything like that. Those are the landlord's problems. So if you just know that, hey, I can go rent a place, even if you have to rent for 6 months and you're only going to pay X amount of dollars, that's it. That's all you have to pay for. And you can more easily build that into your budget than knowing that you own a property and not truly knowing, right, what expenses might come from doing that. Another benefit of renting is that you have the ability to go wherever you want. Once you do buy this second house, you're going to spend more time there because that's where your resources are going. But if you're someone who's looking to travel and try different places, maybe even travel to different countries, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do that if you only own one house. So next, if you're going to rent it out, you want to think about, do you really want to be a landlord, right? As you're getting closer to your retirement years, do you want the stress of being a landlord? I can tell you that I'm a landlord. I own some properties, and it's great when the tenants are paying, when all the properties are rented, and there's no repairs. But as soon as you get a vacancy or you have a problem tenant that's late on their rent or is not taking care of the property, now it's another concern that you have. I often tell clients that the easiest money you're ever going to make is going to be interest or dividends that you receive from your investment portfolio. Rental income is definitely sometimes very hard-earned income. Having a rental property can be a good investment, but you have to be committed to either managing it yourself or having a slightly lower return and a little less stress by using a management company. But that could be a whole nother episode as far as selecting a management company. You really have to be careful that they're actually reputable management company and they're doing what they say they're going to do as far as putting a good tenant in there and also making sure that they're maintaining your property. So let's talk about the financing, how you can structure this. Anytime you're buying a second house, it's going to require you to put more money down than it would when you're buying your primary residence. When you're buying your primary residence, there's certain programs available to you through FHA or VA where you only have to put a minimal amount down. But when you're buying a second house, most likely you're going to have to put anywhere from 20 to 30% down. So if you have that money in cash or non-retirement accounts, it's going to make it more easy for you to access that. If all of your money is in retirement accounts, then you have a couple options. One would be that you could possibly take a loan against your retirement money if you still have money in a 401k or a 403b plan, and that plan allows loans. You can borrow up to half of the account or $50,000. That's one way that you could get some of the money together for the down payment. Another option is that you could just take a distribution from your retirement account. That's what the money's there for. And you could just take a one-time withdrawal from the account so that you had the money available to you. If you're not 59 and a half, obviously there will be a 10% penalty because buying a second house is not an exclusion. Another option is that you could, if your existing house has equity in it, or maybe if it's paid off, you could use that house to borrow against the equity from it, usually through a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit. And you could have that set up in advance of when you're going to buy the house. And then you use that money as part of the down payment to help you put the mortgage in place. And you'd want to obviously talk more with your local bank or a bank that you have a relationship with or a mortgage broker to talk about the different options that you have available. Another benefit, if you do end up buying the second house, is that if you could make this second house your primary residence, and you could potentially change your residency to a state maybe that has better tax treatment than the state that you're living in. So there could be an added benefit of that, but you have to remember that you need to spend 6 months and 1 day in that state to make it your resident state. I actually talk about this back in episode 5, Taxes in Retirement. So check that out if you're interested in learning more about how that could help you. So I hope this gives you some parameters to ponder when buying a second house. And as I mentioned for the last couple weeks, that my workshops are starting up beginning October 6th, my retirement readiness workshop. 2-night workshop that goes over the issues that you need to be thinking about as you're putting together your plan for retirement. If you're interested, you can go to my website, retirewithryan.com or morrisseywealthmanagement.com, and you can sign up. All of these classes, there's 4 options that you have to choose from, will be done virtually, and so you don't have to worry about going in person to a crowded area, and you could attend the class from the safety of your house. Hope that you have a great week. Please tune in next Wednesday for next week's episode. Take care.
You should consult a financial advisor familiar with your specific circumstances before you make any financial decisions. Nothing in this broadcast constitutes a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mention of rates of return are historical or hypothetical in nature and are not a guarantee of future returns. Ryan Morrissey, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Morrissey Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor.